watching.
Well, hopefully that's the idea that there's people watching.
Yeah.
Hey, wait, watch this. Flash ads. We've been working on that.
Come on, buddy. You have to open up.
Well, I'm impressed.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Nice to have you along. Thank you for joining us. Today, clearly, we have a special guest, the one, the only, my smelly big brother, Alex. Thank you for coming on. This is a family show, mate. It's a family show. Nice to have you, mate. Thank you for coming along. I know you're a busy guy, but we had a question that we figured was right up your alley, didn't we, Hiro? From a colleague of yours, stateside. Essentially, the question that we're looking at today unpacks whether or not Kendo is becoming a little bit too on the competitive side, a little bit too many competitions, and is that removing us or moving us away from the All Japan Kendo Renmei and the FIK's concept of Kendo and purpose of practicing Kendo, right? So I might just chuck. I think it's a little bit a long question to put up on the thing, but that's it in a nutshell. Hiro, have I captured that?
Yep. Amen.
All right. So, Alec, you're one of those globe-trotting Kenshi. You spend a lot of time. Obviously, you live in Japan. You've got roots in New Zealand. You've got contacts all over the world through your Kendo, through your research and what have you. What are your observations in terms of the increasing number of competitions in Kendo, right? And then the follow-up to that is, do you think that's becoming a problematic thing, or that's moving us away from that? I believe it's 1975, the concept of Kendo was published. Yeah. So just what are your observations in terms of the competition scene?
I think, well, internationally speaking, and even, well, in my case, being in Japan, certainly the number of tournaments is, well, in recent years it has increased, and competitions are as popular as ever, if not more popular. My observations of things outside Japan are that the number of competitions is increasing. The level of the competitors is also increasing. And to be perfectly honest, with regards to the actual question, is this detracting from the original essence of Kendo as a way for improving the self in accordance with the principles of the sword, as per the official concept of Kendo put out in 1975. I don't think it's any different now than it ever was, to be perfectly honest. Sure that more competitions, therefore Kendo must be getting more competitive. Therefore, if people are getting more competitive, they're forgetting what Kendo is supposed to be. Therefore, it becomes a bastardization of what Kendo is all about. It's becoming overly competitive. They've been saying exactly the same thing for the last 200 or 300 years. Every generation will say this. Every generation of old geezers who are not particularly happy with the overt competitive side. I mean, Borgu, as we use it in Kendo now, that was invented basically in the early 1700s, Borgu and Shinai. And before then, the practice of Kenjutsu was centered mainly on kata. And the kata was getting increasingly ostentatious as Japan entered a period of peace and hadn't had experience with war for over 100 years. And all of these new schools were popping up with these wonderful new acrobatic kata that looked really cool, but had absolutely no practical application at all. So even then, Kenjutsu was being criticized as being something not very real and pretty pointless. So they invented training armor, Borgu and Shinai, so that you could actually do full contact training with each other, and that way you could test whether the techniques were real or not. I can only see myself. Are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're
I'm
just
a bit afraid of us just talking.
It's one of those flash things that we can do with this.
So what happened when they developed the Shinai and the Borgu? They realized that, hey, we can actually engage in proper contests with each other. Oh, this is so much fun. And it became very, very competitive particularly from the 1800s. And if you were good at what they called in those days gekken or gekken, which is just basically what we do now, hitting each other with shinai. If you became good at that, you sort of became a kind of celebrity. So you got a name for yourself for being a very skilled swordsman. And so the rivalry was intense, the rivalry between the various schools and the various dojos. And people would travel around the country just to practice in some of the famous dojos. And particularly, there were 3 very famous dojos in Edo, in Tokyo. And so you got people who would try and think of all sorts of ways to get the upper hand in their matches. There's one very famous kenshi by the name of, what was his name? Ishi Susumu, I think. I have to check that.
Sounds right to me.
Barrel thing.
Well, he was famous because he used a really long shinai.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah, a really long shinai. So he'd just kick everybody's butt with his really long
Was he
shinai.
compensating for something, do you think? Or?
Well, I don't know. I never met the guy personally. Maybe, but in any case, he was quite devastating in terms of his skill, and with his extra long shinai, which he basically used like a spear, and just skied the hell out of people. People hated fighting him because they were going to lose. It's not really in the spirit of personal development, isn't it? It's kind of cheating by today's standards. But my point is that throughout time, over the centuries, Kendo has always been incredibly competitive. If you think of some of the great masters in the 20th century, people like Takano Sasaburo and Mochida, 10th Dan, and Saimura Goro, 10th Dan. If you read some of the things that they wrote just before the war, they're lamenting the overt competitive nature that Kendo has taken on, and it's not good. It's detracting from the true essence of Kendo. So it goes on and on and on. I think it's always good to have this discussion because it does remind you that there is more to Kendo than just the competitive side, and the educational aspects, the parts that are represented by the concept of Kendo that was put out in 1975 to train the character or Ningen Keisei no Michi. How do you say that in English, Hiro?
Discipline your human character, right?
The road to human development.
Okay, so to develop yourself through learning the principles of the sword. It's always good to have these reminders. And some people say that that's at odds with the competitive aspects of Kendo. And in fact, one of the reasons why the concept of Kendo was developed in 1975 was as a reminder, because in those days, Kendo was incredibly popular. From the 1960s, 1970s, Kendo was really one of the most popular sports in Japan. It's not the case now. But in those days it was, and to make it more, because there's so many children doing Kendo, the number of competitions increased significantly to the extent that people started getting worried that Kendo is getting too competitive. We've got to make sure that they remember that it's not all about winning. There are other aspects of Kendo that we've got to keep in mind, and that's precisely the reason why they came up with the concept of Kendo. It was a reminder, and it still serves as a reminder. But having said that, competitions are really important in Kendo. It's what motivates a lot of people. I see it in Europe, I see it in the States, I see it in New Zealand to an extent, see it in Japan, certainly, especially with the environment that I train in at the moment with university students. University students are incredibly competitive. In fact, they don't give a damn about anything else except shiai and how they're going to win. And so they'll come up with all sorts of new strategies and ideas to win. And this is what gets people worried, because you start coming up with strategies that to enable you to win. That's not in the correct spirit of Kendo. So if you keep doing that, it's going to go on a downward spiral. That's what people get worried about. But the thing is, it's always been like that. And one of the big differences between Kendo as a sport and other sports is not much. Okay, Kendo is a sport. Okay, the sporting aspect of it, as I said, is really important. You learn a lot by learning how to defeat your opponents. You learn a lot by winning matches. You learn a lot by losing matches. And you think about it and you get pissed off and you go, damn, how do I beat this guy? He beat me twice already. How am I going to beat him? You use your brain. You train harder. And you come up with strategies to find success in the competitive arena. Okay, and if you're really successful, then maybe that's going to lead on to a job related to Kendo in a company or perhaps the police or whatever, if you're really, really good at it, right? It's just the same as what it always was hundreds of years ago as well. Okay, you get kind of celebrity status. But so in that sense, Kendo and the competitive side of it is really, really not much different to any other sport. One of the big differences, I think, is that there is no retirement in Kendo. Like if you're a pro baseball player or a pro rugby player or whatever, by the time you're in your mid-30s, you're pretty much done, aren't you? Okay, your body's had it, and you're not peaking anymore. You get dropped from the team, then you go into retirement. You might keep a connection with that sport by coaching or whatever, but generally as a player, that's it. But with Kendo, there's no retirement. You keep going and going and going and going. This weekend, I was away for a mini gashuku training camp with some Hachidan senseis. It was a very small private dojo, and
that was the picture.
Yeah, it was pretty beautiful. Awesome. These guys, they're all in their 60s or 70s, absolutely kicking my ass, man. Okay, it's like I'm 51 now, and I'm actually feeling pretty physically. Well, I'm pretty drained at the moment, as you can probably tell, but physically and mentally on top of my game in Kendo in terms of everything seems to be falling into place from 30, 40 years of hard training. It's all sort of suddenly feeling right. I might not win competitions, but I don't care because I'm after something else. And that is really quite simply why I think that you don't have to worry about competition. Competition, that's a stage that you have to go through to get to where I'm sort of approaching now, where these Hachidan senseis that I was training with over the weekend, I mean, in their younger days, they were demons in the Shiaijo. That's why they were police. That's why they ended up eventually getting, the grade, the top rank of Hachidan, because they were so goddamn good. They developed all of their skills through the competition. Now, of course, they don't go into competition. Now it's all about a completely different level of understanding of Kendo. And that's what I'm aiming for now as well. Whether I get there, I don't know, but it's all part of the process. So you understand that once the competitive side, once you grow out of the competitive side, there's another wonderful world of profundity waiting for you in Kendo. And that's what makes it different, sets it apart from other other sports or other physical activities, I think. So you do Kendo to suit your age and to suit your needs and your desires at that particular time. There might be a stage where you go through competition's really important, but like I've experienced personally, and you guys have too, I think, you sort of grow out of that and you start looking for other things. And other aspects of Kendo interest you more. And that is, without knowing it, without even thinking about it, that is precisely what personal development is. And that's what Kendo is facilitating. So we think, oh, yes, we've got to do Kendo because we want to be good people. Nobody thinks like that. Nobody thinks like that. It's just the result of an ongoing process of development, self-development through Kendo. And so I'm rambling now, I think, but I believe that that the competitive side of Kendo is really, really important. And I don't think it should be lessened or taken away because it's hurting the integrity of Kendo. The opposite, I think.
Mate, it's so interesting to have this talk with you. You and I and Hiro as well have had this talk over beers over the last number of years, and it's always really, really interesting. We always tend to agree on the point, but I think what's really an observation that I've had in other conversations with other Kendo mates is the sentiment that Kendo is not a sport, can't be a sport because of this Ningen Keisei, this character development, human development sort of idea that we have. And oftentimes, and I've heard you say it just now, and I think it's brilliant that you did, it kind of puts it to bed, hopefully, for some people. Kendo is a sport. If you were to look at the Western literature, for whatever value that holds for people, it fits the definition. It's got a set of predetermined rules and skills, and it's got a competitive element and those sorts of things. But what I'm hearing you say, and I know that we all agree in this room at least, is that that's not necessarily a bad thing. We don't want to paint sport or athletes in other mainstream sports as not as holy as us because we're on this pathway to Ningen Keisei. If you were to talk to the All Blacks, for example, we all know the All Blacks here, the New Zealand national rugby team, they're absolutely on board with this sentiment of Ningen Keisei because they talk about better people make better athletes. That has been in their past their philosophy. So they look to develop one of the most successful professional sports teams in history to develop them as people because they know the value of taking that philosophical stance. Yes, competition is a big part of what they do. It's a big part, like you've said, big part of some of our our colleagues' journey through Kendo to be competitive. But the key thing here, if I can attempt to summarize what you've said, is that there's a point there in your Kendo career where that doesn't have to be, or maybe it can't be the only thing you do. And now you go off on a different trajectory where you can start to really focus on other things that are important. So I like to think of Kendo as a sport. I don't see a problem with that. I don't think that that's a negative thing whatsoever. But what makes it unique and perhaps resonates in that with people when they say we're martial arts or Budo is that pathway that you can take outside of competition and participation focused, or it might be grading and it might be challenging yourself to get to the next rank level, or maybe become a shimpan and contribute back in that way, or as you said, coaching. So I think it's an important point to drive home, that it's any number of ways to develop ourselves as people. It doesn't need to get all caught up in the definition. Is it a sport or is it a Budo? Well, does it matter? And probably not, because we're talking about the opportunities that it allows us to take on after that competitive edge or desire is gone, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you start talking about whether Kendo is a sport or a Budo, people tend to get very emotional because they're very tied up in it. And really, whether Kendo is a sport or a Budo, as you say, in some ways it's semantics. In other ways, it represents a particular philosophy that you are adhering to at a particular time in your life and on the way of Kendo. So if kids over here now, like I said, the university students, they could give two damns about, Kendo as a way of life. But I know through my experience of seeing these kids graduate from university and then into the workforce and then get families, and you see after 10 years away from university and doing Kendo in the community, gradually, their whole outlook on Kendo changes. It evolves as they evolve as people as well, and what they do it for changes. So it's just a natural progression. Yeah. So certainly, of course, Kendo is a sport. It has a world championships, for crying out loud. Whether you like that or not, it doesn't matter, because there are a lot of people out there that do, and that keeps a lot of people motivated and training hard. And then gradually, they will find new things because of that experience. And like I said at the start, Kendo has always been like this, right since the very beginning. Very competitive, but you find more meaning as you get older, and you accrue more life experience, and you can find many similarities or common points between what you're doing in Kendo and what you're doing in your daily life. Problems with your Kendo turn out to be problems or personality flaws that you try and fix in your Kendo, and by extension of that, you're sort of developing your own mind as well and purging yourself of various weaknesses and so on and so forth. If you were to say to younger people in particular, because that's where the sporting or the competitive side is most popular, no, you've got to stop this, because your whole point here is it's Budo, it's not sport, and you've got to be a better human being. How many people do you think would continue doing it? Not a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, and that would be unfortunate, because then they would not sort of be able to gradually immerse themselves in this Michi side of Kendo, which is what we call the Budo side. Okay, so it's a natural process that takes time, and that's the beauty of it. That's why Kendo's so cool when you go to a dojo and you've got 4 generations training together in one dojo. I mean, how many other sports or physical activities do you know of, or any kind of activity do you know of, where there's so many people of different stages of their life can actually come together and do that thing together with each other? We're talking about people in their 80s and 90s down to kids who are 5 or 6 years old. I can't think of many other sports or anything that can do that, and that's just a demonstration of Kendo is alive and well, and it's not getting too competitive. It's just enough competitive, I think, just to keep the wheels turning.
Such a great way to look at it, man. And if you think, just to sort of try and capture this conversation, when we ask questions about is it becoming too this or too that, it becomes a little bit constrictive, doesn't it? Whereas what you're sort of suggesting here is that there's multiple ways to look at Kendo and what it offers as a physical activity or a physical pursuit. Not that it has to be this way, it has to be just kek, or it has to be just this, or whatever. As you say, as you go through different life stages, it has multiple meanings, and in that sense it's not constricted into this little definition of what a Budo Japanese martial art should be, but it's multiple multiple ways of looking at and getting benefit from it. Is probably a much more productive conversation to have, as you say, because this is an ongoing conversation. Perhaps we should flip the script a little bit and say, hey, what are the multiple opportunities we have to benefit from it? I want to ask a question just really quickly, and if there's anyone watching that wants to fire a question for Alex Sensei into the chats, go ahead. We won't hold them up for too much longer. I know you've got to go and teach a group of young people the wrong stuff to keep life interesting. The question that I had, you said earlier on that the level of competition is increasing that you've seen. People are getting really competitive, or much more competitive. Do you see that in sense of the types of waza that they're using, or the level of physicality or fitness that they bring to the shiai? Or what are you noticing in terms of that trend towards being more competitive, be it in Japan or in Europe or Australasia?
Well, Japan is always going to be, very high level of competition, obviously. But my jaunts to Europe and to the States and the competitions that I've seen, the States is also kind of different in many ways. I mean, the States there's a lot of the States, right? And there's a lot of levels, and but Europe in particular, I've noticed, particularly in the last, I guess you could say 20 years, just the skill level, the attitude to Kendo, the way that they hold themselves in Shiai, just overall, it's matured a lot, and so there's a lot of formidable European kenshi in international kendo. Say 30 years ago, it wasn't. There were a few, but now there's a lot. So overall, I think they're all feeding off each other and learning from each other. And to the extent now that they're not necessarily looking to Japan for guidance. There's a lot of very capable coaches and competitors in Europe, and they're sort of becoming kind of independent now. And so I think it's a really, really good thing. It's just an indication of how overall the level and the enthusiasm towards Kendo has increased. There are some issues, and this is a problem in Japan just as much as anywhere else. The attitude in Shiai sometimes is very, quite simply put, rude. So not so much respect for the traditions, and I mean, obviously you're fighting really hard against your opponent. That kind of almost looking at your opponent with scorn rather than respect. So with this very high level of competition that's developing around the world, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. That yes, competition is good, fighting to win is good, but always having that respect to your opponent and to the shimpan is a very important part of this developmental process, and that's easily forgotten. And that is something that I see in Japan amongst university students as well, but pretty much everywhere. This is something when we talk about, Kendo is becoming too competitive and blah, 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 blah. That side of it's not a problem. As long as the respect for tradition, respect for your opponents and for the shimpan and for the general environment, and respect for Kendo is present, then I don't think that's a problem. That's something that we need to be reminded of.
It's definitely.
I don't know if I was making any sense there, but
absolutely, and it's a big shift in New Zealand. I've observed as well in youth sport, in particular, sideline behaviour, not necessarily from the players themselves, but from the parents and their attitudes towards opposition, to referees, and keeping in mind that, hey, okay, we're playing a game here, we're playing a sport, but it's really not that important who wins and loses. So the Ningen Kese lens is turned on to the parents of the players as well, but the essence is still the same: respect for the game, respect for the people playing the game, because if you don't have an opponent, you don't have the opportunity. Let's wrap this up really quickly. There's one quick question here, Alec, I think would be really good for you to talk about, if you wouldn't mind, really quickly. Is it still important to continue to participate in competition as you get older? What would your thoughts be on that, mate?
Well, that's entirely on the individual. I think that most people do to some extent. They might not be championships, but for example, every year I will go into the Kyoto Taikai, which is the famous tournament that they have in Kyoto in May during Golden Week in Japan for Rokudan, Renshi, and above. So it's for the Kodansha, the higher ranks. You know, a lot of the people in this tournament, it's not a tournament that you go and win prizes. You're just basically on the floor for 2 minutes and everybody's watching you, and then you move off and the next two come on. It's as nerve-wracking as hell. I get more nervous going into the Kyoto Taikai for that 2 minutes than I ever did at any of the World Championships matches that I fought, because everybody's watching you, and you just for that 2 minutes, you're thinking about it months in advance. How are you going to, approach your opponent? How are you going to do the best kendo? But you're still going to win. Okay, so you're always challenging yourself, and because it's a Kodansha Shiai, most people there are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Right the way. There's no teenagers, there's no university students. It's all high-ranking people, and so in that sense, competition, even as you get older, it keeps you thinking, and it tests your values. You let's face it, if you go out into a competition, you don't want to get beaten, okay, but you don't want to win dirty either. You don't want to, you want to, especially as you get older and you're aiming for different things, not medals or trophies, but you're aiming for different things. You want to show that your kendo is strong and beautiful, and one way that you know if it's strong or beautiful or not is how you go in a competition. Okay, so I think that competitions of, they come in various shapes and sizes, competitions, don't they? I think continuing to participate in some kind of competition as you get older it keeps you honest and it keeps you focused, and I think it has a lot of benefits.
Yeah, for sure. Great answer. Thank you, Alex, so much for your time, mate. I know that we all know that you're a super busy dude, so we really appreciate that, man. And maybe we can have you on again. Someone asked a question about religion and Budo, and I know that was your first PhD thesis. Any more PhDs on the horizon, mate, or it's two enough?
No, two's enough for the moment. I'll reassess next year.
At the moment.
Hey, thank you all for joining us. I hope that was valuable to you. I know it was for me. So once again, thank you, Alec. Thank you, Hiro.
Cheers very much.
Catch you guys later. I won't forget the outro today. We'll see you later.